and thanks for tuning in to the Path 11 podcast. I am your host, April Hanna. At the Path 11 podcast, we are here trying to deliver leading-edge research on consciousness, healing, and metaphysics. And just like you, we are trying to answer the big questions about life. Who are we? Why are we here? And what is our purpose? We hope by listening to our podcast, it will make each day you live on Earth a little easier to understand. And now for today's podcast. Hey, Path 11 podcast listeners. I was wondering if you have checked out our Patreon page yet. If not, you can go to path11podcast.com and click on the Patreon button. And for just $1 donation, you can have access to some private things that we were putting up on the Patreon page, like my MBT experience that I took in Tennessee with Tom Campbell. I did an audio journal for about the 4 days explaining what had happened to me during my binaural beat sessions. It was amazing, impacted my life, changed my life, but we are only going to allow our Patreon supporters access to the 4 days of my journal entry. And it is a Food for Thought Friday, so that is where you can find it. You can donate just $1 to listen to it. If you like the content that we have up on Patreon, you can continue to keep your subscription for $1 a month. Otherwise, you can cancel it at any time. So head on over to path11podcast.com and click on the button that says Patreon. I was wondering if you guys heard or actually have been over to our website or YouTube channel to see that we just launched a new web series called Conversations on the Path. It's awesome. I get to sit down with everyday people who are finally connected and knowing their purpose and trying to make changes in the world, trying to uplift consciousness and bring healing to people. We are going to introduce you to people that you probably have never even heard about, amazing projects, amazing things that these everyday people just like you and me are doing in the world to help educate others. We have a few episodes that are out now. One is on CBD oil. Another one is on dowsing. We have another episode which is talking about the plastic straw movement and how we are changing the world and helping to heal the ocean with Earth Last Straw. And we also have a great interview that's going to be coming out soon on peaceful cities, where we have people who are meditating over high crime areas and reducing the reduction of crime. So that's what these episodes are like on Conversations on the Path. If you haven't already, check them out. I think you're going to love them. I have a quick announcement before we get to our guest today on the Path 11 podcast, and I wanted to remind you that you can head on over to our website, path11productions.com, and you're going to see Afterlife Awareness Conference. I'd like you to click on that link, and I want you to know that we now have a membership to the directory of all the videos from this live stream event that we filmed back in November of 2018. There were some amazing speakers at this conference, which include William Buhlman from the Monroe Institute, Suzanne Northrop, and Thomas John, who were amazing psychic mediums. You get a chance to see them reading the audience and the people validating what they were saying. Another one of my favorites was Suzanne Geisman, who is also a medium and intuitive counselor, and told a fantastic account and story of a soul that had passed away but left all of these clues and came back to communicate with people. Monica Williams Murphy, she is a doctor and had a great presentation about conscious dying in the clinical setting. Terry Daniel and Linda Fitch also had amazing workshops that they presented as well. So I'd like you guys to head on over path11productions.com and click on Afterlife Conference. Check out and see all the videos that we have available to you for this membership that we have going on. And now on to our show. Hi, everyone. We have a great show for you today. I'm pretty excited about this guest. I would like to introduce to you Mark Pitstick. He is an author, master's clinical psychologist, holistic chiropractic physician, frequent media guest, and webinar workshop teacher. He directs the Soul Phone Foundation, co-founded with Dr. Gary Schwartz, online and worldwide, Greater Reality Living Groups, and is a board member for Helping Parents Heal. Dr. Pitstick can help you know and show, no matter what is going on around you, that your earthly experience is a totally safe, meaningful, and magnificent adventure amidst forever. Mark, welcome to our show.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yes. So many of our listeners who have actually caught up on all of the episodes will be familiar with one of the past guests that we had on, Suzanne Northrop, who is a psychic medium, and we actually got a chance to meet her in person at the Afterlife Awareness Conference, and she gave us a great story about her experience in working with Dr. Gary Schwartz, and I know that we're going to go into speaking about the Soul Phone Foundation, but I think it's really cool when, as a podcaster, we get a chance to begin this web, if you will, and be introduced to one person here, and then that leads us to this person here, and then this person, and then they're all connected. So I was really excited to have you as a guest here today. I'd also like, if you wouldn't mind starting, maybe just giving our listeners a little overview of the tremendous work that you have done. You have a very, very long bio, and you have done so much work in the world, but just give them a little taste of, what your path has been and how it's led you up to where you are today.
Sure. I think some of the most important evidence to share is that there's some multiple independent sources of evidence that I never totally forgot where we come from when I came to Earth. The first piece of evidence was when I was 6 years old. My parents were showing me a beautiful sunset, and I told them it reminded me of God. And I'm getting teared up 60 years later talking about it. They only told me about that 20 years later when I was in theology school. And I was brought up a Lutheran. It was always God the Father this and God the Father that. So there's really no reason why I would have associated at that young age the Supreme with a beautiful sunset, unless indeed I had some remembrance. I didn't develop total spiritual amnesia as many people do. And over the years, about every 20 years, I get a independent verification of that from a psychic medium or a person who sees auras or energy, etc., who says, wow, we don't get many of you in these parts. And they invariably say something like, I'm a teaching soul who doesn't come to Earth very often, but when people like me do, they have a huge mission to share. Well, I can believe that. I felt like a stranger, a strange land as a child, and it turns out many people who are more evolved souls feel like that when they're kids. You just, like you have trouble fitting in. You almost have to learn how to be a good earthling because human ways seem so foreign in a number of ways. But my trajectory on this path really took off at age 19 when I first started working in hospitals as a respiratory therapist. Part-time, I was in pre-med studies and theology school for the 6 years I worked as a respiratory therapist. Well, after a year of doing basic stuff, they spotted I was fairly sharp and trained me to do, and this is the early 1970s, to do procedures only physicians can do now: arterial blood gas punctures, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, putting the breathing tube down into the lungs called intubation, etc. And so I usually work night shift on weekends, and typically in the small hospital where I worked, it would be an ER physician and me and the nurses throughout the hospital. So I was just about every shift with one or more people who were dying or as they died. And seeing all that at such a young age, including children, because we had a pediatric ward there, just brought me to my knees. Just pretty much blew up everything I had been taught, because my religious upbringing was that God was all-knowing, all-loving, and all-caring. If that's the case, why do little children get run over by trucks or abused to death by a mother's boyfriend? And so I pretty much threw everything I believed out the window and sought out for myself to find out the answers one way or the other. I didn't know if ideas like afterlife or God fell into the category of Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny or not, but I wanted to know what game were we playing here, during this earthly experience. So I set out to achieve a holistic healthcare training and went to theology school, took all the pastoral counseling, biblical study, as you mentioned, a 2-year master's in clinical psychology, and worked in mental health centers for several years, and then a doctorate in chiropractic, of all things, because it was and still is the only physician level training that recognizes the importance of body, mind, and spirit and addresses that. And so then for the last 33 years, working with tens of thousands of people in private practice, doing workshops, I've hosted 2 different radio shows, my books, etc., and sharing the evidence that I have gained along the way that clearly shows life continues after bodily death, all the good news that accompanies that knowledge, and how we can fine-tune ourselves so that we can do what we came here to do, handle life's inevitable challenges, and enjoy the journey.
And you also wrote the book, The 11 Questions, Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Life, Death, and Afterlife.
Yes, that came as a result of a radio show I did for a year called Ask the Soul Doctors. And I was blessed to have people like Raymond Moody and Anita Moorjani, Carolyn Mays, Dr. Gary Schwartz, and others, and asked them the same 11 questions and shared my answers as well. Who am I? Why am I here? What happens after I die? Is there really a higher power? If so, why is there all this suffering? Why do children die? What happens to people who die from suicide, etc.? And so those interviews, by the way, can be listened to for free on my website, soulproof.com. At the top tab, it says radio shows, and you can hear all of our answers. Important stuff. I look forward to the day when children are taught these basics, really we should know at the beginning of life instead of hopefully at the end.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things with your introduction there, and you were talking about, how you kind of move through your path, but also knowing that maybe you weren't of the earth, you felt very, very different being here. It still shows and speaks to the fact that even if you have that all-knowing and you are a highly evolved spirit that comes back to teach, there's still a lot of work for the soul to do. It wasn't like you just kind of knew this but didn't have to, do anything about it. I mean, you went through extensive experience and trainings and, almost like this thirst and quest for knowledge to be able to teach people.
Sure. And I think we all do eventually. Sometimes it takes facing death or going through a tragedy and these various stimuli that trigger us to ask the big questions of life are collectively called spiritually transformative experiences, or STEs. It has its own acronym like NDEs, near-death experiences, and ADCs, after-death contacts. But you're right, being even partly enlightened doesn't make this life totally easy, but it lightens it. Same way if I work with so many bereaved parents, and knowing that they'll see their children again, knowing that death is not an end, doesn't take away all their grief and sadness, but it lightens it. And that's a huge deal when you know that when a loved one passes, it's not a goodbye, it's a see you later.
Right. And so I'd like to move into a little bit more of the Soul Phone Foundation, because I know that you're directing that and you're supporting the efforts of Gary Schwartz. And so tell us a little bit about what this is and how, it's working with an evidence-based technology for spirit communication. I mean, that's exciting.
Sure.
That just sounds like fabulous. And I bet a lot of our listeners may not have even have heard of this yet. And I really just want to get to know more about it because I'm curious myself.
Good. Well, first of all, the soul phone is a term for a number of anticipated devices that will allow, quote, spirit communication. Dr. Schwartz and I have worked really hard over the last few years. He invited me to join him and be the face or the mouthpiece for his organization because he's a serious scientist, Yale and Harvard professor, now at the University of Arizona. And he's involved in so much research, he doesn't have the time to really write the articles and do the interviews and so on. So the soul phone is, the first device is the soul switch. And we actually recently achieved what's called the stage 2 prototype. And it's fairly complex, and your listeners can visit the site soulphone.org to learn more. But in a nutshell, the soul switch is like a switch on the wall. It's a binary indicator, a yes or no. And so far, Dr. Schwartz and his team, and he works with a team of electrical engineers, optical physicists, software programmers, evidential mediums like Suzanne Northrop and others to do this work. And so they're now able to ask questions for which the answer would be yes or no, and receive 90% accurate answers using tests, for example, the personal identification test. If they're working with Nikola Tesla, for example, they would ask, and this is all computer assisted, and some of the research has been done when there's no one in the laboratory at all. Is your first name Nikola? Answer should be yes. Is your last name Pitstick? Answer should be no, etc. And again, they're getting a 90% accuracy with these. The next series of tests is called cognitive understanding. And in that, they show a series of photographs. And again, they ask these questions. They show a picture of a bird, and these questions are posed both verbally and printed on the top of the photograph. Is this a picture of a bird? Yes. Then they show a picture of a cat. Is this a picture of a bird? Should be no. And again, 90% accuracy. So this demonstrates at a very high level of certainty that those who have passed on are still alive. They're still able and willing to communicate. They still have, they have retained memory of human language and what items are and so on. You know, it's not like they're just in a whole different setting and forget everything that happened on Earth. And Dr. Schwartz and he and I just spoke recently this morning. He is now working on something that we hope will be ready by January, which will use these photos to allow clients to have visits with their, quote, departed loved ones. For example, if you wanted to visit with your grandmother, if she's passed, you would say, first there would be the personal identification test. You know, is your first name Mary or whatever? Were you born in this city? And after 20 questions, 10 which should be yes, 10 which should be no, you have a good idea that this person is who you think it is. Then secondly, show a series of photos. Is this a photo of me, April, when I was a little girl? Yes. And then show a picture of me. Is this a picture of me when I was a little girl? Hopefully your grandma's going to say no, and etc. So this is the first level of providing comforting, inspiring evidence and rudimentary communication. Now, when the stage 3 soul switch device is ready, that will allow creation of what's called a soul keyboard. If you look at a keyboard, that's this assemblage of 43 switches. When you press on an L, that's a yes for an L and a no for everything else. And so Dr. Schwartz thinks it'll be a relatively simple engineering feat to create what we're calling a soul keyboard. It'll be about 4 foot wide and 3 foot deep that will allow us then to communicate with those who have moved on via texting and typing. The third anticipated device is called Soul Voice. That'd be just like what we're doing now with a phone or Skype with audio only. And then fourth, Soul Video, which would be like FaceTime, Skype, or Zoom, seeing and hearing. And eventually, Dr. Schwartz anticipates that he just came back from a Michael Jackson tribute shows in Las Vegas and the huge holographic images of Michael. And Dr. Schwartz anticipates that in the future, and it could be 10 years, there will be a full-size holographic images of our dear ones who are in another part of forever, and we'll be able to visit that closely.
Huh.
Yeah, so that's the Soul Phone. The Soul Phone Foundation, then, we started. It's a nonprofit to raise funds for the Soul Phone research, because as you can imagine, the staffing and the equipment is ultra expensive, even though the University of Arizona is providing offices and all kinds of assistance. And then also to educate people, and that's why we have the website, soulphone.org. Now, shortly after starting working together, Dr. Schwartz and I realized the paradigm shift that will occur, just the huge impact. I don't know if you saw a movie, it was on Netflix a couple years ago with Robert Redford, and it was a consideration of what would happen if a scientist proved once and for all that no one really died. There is an afterlife, and they took such a horribly negative slant on that and came up with lots of people would commit suicide. We hope that's not the case, but we're very clear that there will be a revolution in all areas of, healthcare, politics, law, etc., how we handle near-death, end of this life issues, and so on. And so we wrote the book called Greater Reality Living, which came out earlier this year. And then I and a team, we have 25 different volunteers now on the foundation who have helped me put together greaterrealityliving.com, a wonderful website. We're getting ready to launch groups early next year. We have 80 people from 14 countries who want to start Greater Reality Living groups. But that's a lot. What's your next question?
Okay, I have a couple. So as I'm hearing you describe each of these different things as a way to reach out and connect to our past loved ones, when I was younger, we used to use a Ouija board.
Right.
This almost sounds like, or seems like to me, this is like the virtual Ouija board in some ways.
Yeah, a Ouija board developed by scientists at a prestigious university over a 10-year period. Ouija board on steroids and more.
Yeah. So I have some consciousness questions. Let's start with the soul switch. Okay, so I'm assuming that, let's say if I want to communicate with my grandmother, I'm setting an intention beforehand. So my intention is I'd like to connect with Adeline. So you're actually stating out loud or saying your intent of who it is in the spirit realm that you want to connect with. Is that how you start?
No, not in the beginning. And by the way, I mentioned the devices. The anticipation is that eventually the soul phone will be an app that people can use on any smart device to enable those different sorts of interactions. But in the beginning, it will require an evidential medium like Suzanne Northrop. There are about 30 that Dr. Schwartz has done double and even triple blind studies with at his lab and shown that they are rock stars. You know how in any endeavor, whether it's dance or painting or sports, they're just the cream of the crop, the superstars. Well, he has identified 30 of these in the mediumistic realm. And so one of these will be needed in the beginning to identify, for example, reach your grandmother, say, are you able and willing to meet with April on this date at this time? It also will require a sole operator. You're probably too young to remember the days when using a telephone required an operator, a switchboard operator. Well, in the beginning, it will require a person, and there are numerous, quote, deceased people who are helping from the other side and are willing to do that to help the person who's passed work with the technology, how to do this. Now, that's just in the beginning. Eventually, all that will be necessary. But here's one fact we like to share with people. Alexander Graham Bell received the patent for the first phone in 1876. When I was a kid, let's say 1960, it's still this big clunky device, 5 numbers, private lines, etc. Yeah, it was 100 and where's my math here? It was 84 years later, and it was still at that step. And it took another 43 years before the first big mobile phones came about. So it's going to take a little time for these various devices to evolve.
Got you. And, when I'm on the website right now, when I'm looking at the soul switch, it looks like that there would be a light, kind of going on and off to answer the questions. But my first thought was, how do we know that the person that's asking the question, that it isn't their consciousness affecting the switch to answer yes or no, because they know the answers to the questions that they're asking?
Actually, the person who has, quote, passed on and their consciousness are synonymous. In other words, it is their consciousness. Another way to say that is it's their awareness, their mind, their soul, their spirit. So did I understand your question correctly?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I'm just wondering if the person that is trying to connect with the person who is passed and they're there asking these questions and that they know the answers to, are they innately the ones that are able to make that light go on and off? Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what we call observer-related effects. And Dr. Schwartz and his team have already ruled that possibility out by doing, as I mentioned, experiments when no one is in the building And these are all set up, timed by a computer. So we get the same sorts of results in the research, whether there's physical or human researchers present or not. Same way with clients. In other words, you won't be touching anything, and your quote departed loved ones will be answering, in some cases, questions that you don't know. It's kind of like a visit to a medium. Sometimes a medium will tell the subjects something they don't know. They will differ with the subject's understanding, and later on that's found out to be true. So that's been factored in, but good for you for even thinking that ahead.
Okay, thanks. And another question that I have is kind of maybe with some of the new explanations of what's going on is that we really live in a virtual reality. And I don't know if you subscribe to this theory or not. I'm thinking in particular of someone that I've interviewed. We had him in our documentaries, but Thomas Campbell, who was a former NASA nuclear physicist, wrote his own book on my big toe, meaning his theory of everything. And he really goes into the concept that we are living in a virtual reality. And at some of his workshops, I've asked some questions that I've heard him say before, that when people pass on, he looks at it in terms of more of like a database, not this soul that's just kind of lingering out there and still alive per se. It's kind of hard when we're using metaphors to describe this, but he does agree and say that you can tap into the quote unquote database of your grandmother anytime you want because it's consciousness. But it doesn't necessarily mean that your departed loved one is hanging out somewhere in the ethers waiting for you to ask it questions, and that it's just out there, but that the soul itself continues to have work to do, continues to evolve, but that we do have the capacity to tap into them being more like a program on a computer, and then we can pull up that program and then we can begin to interact with it.
Yeah, what a mind you have. Good job. You should be doing a show like this. Well, first of all, language is very important, so we try to keep language as basic as possible. So when we're saying, I mentioned earlier that we have worked a lot on the language. So the term we actually use are post-material persons, or PMP is the acronym that we hope to introduce into the general lexicon, because the words soul, spirit are certainly outdated and primarily associated with three major religions. So we certainly understand the idea of systems theory, and really ultimately, although most people can't understand it, what is really going on is energy and information manifesting in different ways depending on the observer's perspective. Whether you look at from string theory, virtual reality, or in a religious way, it's a dance of energy. It's God breathing in and out, as Hindus described thousands of years ago. But there's a difference between energy and information that's, quote, dead, just stored. And Dr. Schwartz uses the analogy of the video of a person that's on a DVD. Okay, that's not the person themselves. That's stored memories of the person, stored images of the person, but it's not alive. But his contention, based on all of his research, he's been working on these things for 40 years, the information and energy of everything is alive, eternal, and evolving. And one piece of evidence for that is, we mentioned these 30 different evidential mediums. They have, on many occasions, independently reported to, independently means they haven't put their heads together. They're reporting this and not knowing that other mediums are saying the same thing. For example, on the A team, the team of distinguished luminaries who are, through the mediums, assisting this soul phone research, they will say, Albert Einstein keeps coming to me. And he's dressed just like you see him in photos. He's got his tweed wool jacket and his pipe and his crazy hair. And he'll hear that from as many as 10 different mediums. Well, there's some pretty good evidence that that's not just information stored in the Akashic records. That's Albert. And by the way, part of you saw on the website the what's called the Photon Transmitter, and it allows the yes or no aspect of that is those in spirit, post-material persons, will put their hand in the beam, know how fast it takes to go from one point to the other. Well, if people in spirit put their hand in the beam, then it slows it down. So we'd say, if the answer to the following question is yes, put your hand in the beam. If it's no, don't do anything. And so the question always arises when we describe that, wait a minute, people who have died have hands? Yeah, you can call it the energetic body, astral body, there's different names for it. But they can be just as physical as we, and perhaps more so.
Wow, okay. Now, my next question is going to play more of a devil's advocate. And are there ethics around playing with consciousness? And I'll expand a little bit on what where my mind is going with this, as having a background as a mental health therapist. Let me think about the mom that is grieving of her child that died, say, at 2 years old. And now we have this ability to communicate, and, you know, the mom may have gone through therapy, may have not, but, you know, hears about this and then begins to tap into the consciousness of the 2-year-old child over and over and over and over again. And even though, you know, consciousness is eternal and it could be like that database that we're tapping into, how do we know if we're messing anything up in the evolution of that one consciousness? Or I don't know. I have like tons of questions. I know I'm throwing like a lot at you, but I'm just thinking, like, if let's just say this is a computer program of some sort, but we're running a program over and over and over. You know, I don't know. Is that okay? Is it safe? Are there other implications, let's say, to people who are grieving? Does that help their grief? Does it move them forward? Does it keep them stuck? Does it keep them obsessed, addicted, you know?
Excuse me. How about if we deal with one question at a time? I lost you about 4 questions ago.
I know.
Yeah, let's go back to the first one, which, you know, is it safe or wise? And the indications are that involvement with us on Earth will not interfere with their evolution or their business. If it would, they just won't answer. We can, Carolyn Mays first introduced me to the concept of as on earth, so in heaven. The idea that the quote afterlife is not so dissimilar from here on earth. So what do you do when somebody calls you and you don't want to talk to them for whatever reason?
Just don't answer.
Yeah, exactly. Well, they can do the same thing. But in addition, those who have dropped their bodies, there's good indication that they can bilocate, perhaps be in 10 or 20 or more places at the same time. And so they can communicate with us, visit with us, without affecting their sole agenda, their priorities in the next phase of forever. So what's your next question in that series?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess the question before that is like the ethics behind it, right? So like, you know, most doctors, you know, take that oath, do no harm, you know, and things of that. Do you feel that there is no such thing as really creating any harm as we are trying to connect with this type of consciousness?
These are excellent questions. And by the way, if you have any extra energy or interest, I invite you to contact me, and I would love to have this sort of input on the team, especially as we get ready next year to get the word out more. First of all, there's always a question about the possibility of malicious or capricious entities coming through, and that's one reason for the layers of protection. Sole operator, the medium involved, the personal identification tests, and so on, so that we're very sure who we're dealing with. Secondly, as far as fair, that's one reason why Dr. Schwartz has taken so long to unveil this. We'll just be allowing the first individual sessions next year, because he wanted to cross every T and dot every I. He wants to provide hope, but not baseless hope. He wants to make sure everything has been done. He has had a team. You talk about the devil's advocate. I think they're actually called that, the devil's advocate team for him, a team of top scientists. And they request not to be identified because these are scientists who are involved in prestigious universities and institutes who are already doing research that is already unconventional enough, and they don't want to be tied to this right now. But none of them has been able to find any flaws in his methodology, in his approach.
Yeah, okay. And then I think my other rambling questions on with that is kind of, I guess, more based in the physical reality of the individual that is still alive and how these humans are using this either to advance the grieving process, helping it, or, the other fear could be, then does the individual become too dependent, too reliant? And that happens just with psychic mediums as well, right? I mean, this isn't a new thing that would happen with something that is providing somebody a lot of comfort. But sometimes humans, we can get so used to that and rely on that to be able to connect with our loved ones. So I was
sure, and that happens with people on Earth, with family members who are still on Earth. Right. You may have a relative who calls you every day and wants to whine and complain. So there's just going to be the whole spectrum. But keep in mind, no one has. The only people who have interacted with the devices to this point are the experimenters themselves and a couple of very close people like me. But again, that'll start next year. As far as what it does to the physical person already, because I'm in touch with so many bereaved parents, already has provided a huge amount of comfort because the soul phone technology has added to the breadth and depth of scientific evidence that clearly shows life continues after bodily death. Secondly, it has given a lot of people hope. I mean, they just break down in tears when I tell them about it because they're like, thank God, even if it's a couple years from now, knowing that they'll be able to communicate in some way with their child instead of waiting maybe 40 years until they physically die, that's a huge difference.
Right. And I could also see it as a springboard, of really showing people that this really is possible, right? They use this technology. They have their quote unquote proof now, right? As instead of like a bird flying by or something that they associate with the deceased person is their quote unquote sign,
right.
If they actually see this, then it might be enough for them to just learn that their communication with their deceased loved one really can continue without even having to use these devices, which a lot of people we try to teach people. That.
Okay, there you go again. You really have a good mind about these things. You're exactly right. We anticipate, well, first of all, let me go back. I'm reading a book by Edgar Mitchell, the Apollo 14 astronaut who started the Noetic Science Institute for Noetic Sciences. And he reported that whenever people like Uri Geller, and this is back in the 60s, would demonstrate the ability of his mind to bend spoons on Johnny Carson, Jack Parr shows way back, invariably the Institute would, in the next week, get numerous phone calls from mothers around the country whose children were doing that. They saw the show. Nobody told them they weren't not able to do it, so they just did it. And so we expect the same sort of thing to happen as people realize, drop the fear, open their minds, start tapping into the 99.9% of reality that we call the greater reality that most of us don't perceive with our senses. Then, as you say, more and more people will be able to communicate with in various ways on their own without the devices. Yeah.
The other thing that I'm thinking about as I'm pondering this whole evolution of these worlds, or these realities, it almost feels to me like there's some sort of veil lifting, because we know, like you and I are sitting here and we're having this conversation. There's so many authors, people that we have on our show that are writing about this, right? So it's being kind of filtered into our intellect, right? Okay, I have an intellectual understanding. There's another reality. I can communicate with it. But when I also think about the evolution of consciousness, it's almost like we're beginning to watch with this type of technology that you have, that eventually it may not be separate at all or feel separate. Like we talk about, okay, I'm in a physical body and there's a spirit world. But when we're starting to integrate the technology and showing people how to do it and they're interacting, I feel like those realities really will become one, even though they are one now, but they won't feel as separate. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. As you say, it is all one. Many people come back from near-death experiences. I'm talking about documented near-death experiences in which the person accurately perceived events that occurred inside the resuscitation room, on top of outside the hospital while they're clinically dead. When they come back and they say, we each are one with the one and part of source energy. And so that's the truth. We're interconnected. Albert Einstein mentioned that. He said that the belief that we are separate is an optical delusion. And I mentioned before the greater reality. So it's a scientific fact that our five senses, as magnificent as they are, detect much less than 1% of reality. One metaphor is that if at all that exists in our world, and as we mentioned earlier, in absolute terms, that is really energy and information. But if all that existed in our world were the height of the Empire State Building, the portion the average human can perceive would be the height of a coat of paint. And so, as you say, it's quite likely that the advent of this technology will then open people's minds a bit, help that filtration valve that we had. I had dinner with Eben Alexander earlier this year, and we were talking about how 95% of what the central nervous system does is to inhibit sensory input. It was evolutionary thousands of years ago for survival, but now it's not very adaptive. And that's the importance of centering practices, meditation, and other ways to just open that filtration valve up a little bit, get us to perceive more of what is, and then act upon it and receive all the benefits. And certainly seeing this technology, talking to others who have gone through it, should help relax that fear, which I think is part of the filtration.
Right. Wow. How exciting. It's pretty phenomenal, you know. Geez. And just to like imagine, you know, for you, it's like here you're on like the leading edge of this stuff. It's got to be exciting and overwhelming at times to be like, holy cow, you know, to put it all together.
Well, yeah, I'm very thankful for my team. As I mentioned, we have everything from an attorney, a CPA, marketing people, IT people, social media, and it's really been miraculous how they've come along. You know, throughout my life, I don't talk about it much, but I've had my share of tough times. You know, broken relationships, divorce, financial losses. I lost a lot of my hearing when I was young. I've been bald since I'm in my 20s, you know, different things. That's just part of being human. I'm not complaining, but, you know, that's just what we all go through. And going through all of this work, being involved with this, helps make all of that worthwhile. You know, some people say when they approach physical death, they can look back at their lives and see that it has unfolded in a exquisite, meaningful way. And I can certainly see that now, working at such a high level, that I wouldn't change a thing. You know, if all those, quote, bad things that hadn't happened, I may not be doing what I'm able to do now, and I certainly wouldn't have the compassion, empathy I have now. Exactly. And so there's a message for everyone listening.
Yeah, I would agree. And can you let our listeners know how they can help if, you know, after hearing this, they're saying, gosh, yeah, I'd love to donate. Maybe I'll volunteer. But how can people get involved with the Soul Phone Foundation?
Yeah, first of all, to educate yourself about the evidence. And I mentioned my website, soulproof.com, which has many free articles that address every question that people ask. When a loved one is dying, when your pet has died, what's the scientific and clinical evidence that death is not an end? So you need to educate yourself a bit. I mentioned the radio shows also on soulproof.com and my free newsletter. Next would be to visit the soulphone.org site and to learn more about this soul phone and really wrap your head around like, oh my God, this is really real. There's substantial science behind it. And there's a free newsletter for that. Then I mentioned the greater reality living aspect of it. So again, greater reality is the term we use for the fullness of creation, the vastness of reality that most of us don't perceive. And when we can glimpse even a little more of that, life makes so much more sense. So I coined the term greater reality living to invite people to consider, how would you live and treat yourself and others if you really knew that death is not an end, that you see your loved ones again? You can communicate with them now, and all the other long list of benefits that go along with this. So at the website, greaterrealityliving.com, then is discussion of these groups. So one way people can help is to form a group in their area. These groups exist for 5 main reasons. An acronym for these 5 is LIVES. The L stands for learn the evidence. The I stands for internalize this good news, because it's important to have a deep internalized knowing that we're forever beings, not just a superficial intellectual knowing that may fall apart when things get tough. The V in the LIVES acronym stands for vitalize yourself in body, mind, and spirit, and we mentioned the importance of that earlier. E, enjoy the many benefits, and then S, serve others and yourself and make our world a better place. So if that calls to any of the listeners, you can contact us. We have facilitator managers. We have a project manager who is a London School of Business graduate who worked for multi-billion-dollar companies, and now she's working with our team for free and overseeing a lot of this. So it's really a well set up organization. It's going to be a lot of fun, a chance to meet kindred spirits, and I'll be providing the training online. So people who start groups will get to spend many hours with me and ask questions and so on. And then, as you mentioned, donations. We have membership, various levels of membership, and for each level of membership, donating, there are gifts, all sorts of gifts. And as the donation increases, it includes things like 2 sessions with authentic mediums like Suzanne Northrop, a visit to the lab, dinner with Dr. Schwartz, and being in the Q4 and experiencing the first soul phone device included in that.
Wow. Excellent. As you were going over the greater reality living and, the lives and what it all stands for, I'm thinking, gosh, is there a way to integrate this with hospice? And, this would be a great thing to bring to like the, social worker conferences or, therapists that are working with grieving people, because, they also have those skills to be able to facilitate groups also in a very therapeutic way. And, it's great. It's wonderful.
Okay, I'm begging you now, April. Contact. Yeah, you're right. You actually mentioned something I hadn't thought of. We had already thought about contacting existing groups like Unity Churches and Death Cafe and International Association of Near-Death Studies, but I don't think anybody has really thought of connecting with caregiving groups, certainly hospice, and sharing this great news. And I think this is what Jesus and other great teachers were trying to teach before their message was concretized and twisted by the powers that be. This is the great news that sets us free when we realize we don't die. We're one with Creator. We're here to enjoy life, love one another, serve one another. That's when we're living heaven, whether we're here or in the hereafter.
Right. And then truly heaven does become, on earth, as they say.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Mark, this was awesome. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this interview. It definitely has my mind going in 20 different directions. And you answered my questions very eloquently, even though I did a rapid fire there for a second. But it was great. It was great. I hope our listeners enjoyed it as much as I did. And I'd love to connect with you offline and see how else I could help.
Yeah. Well, again, kudos to you, April, for doing and the obvious depth of your caring, searching, and serving others. Impressive.
Thanks for listening to the Path 11 podcast today. I hope you all enjoyed this show. And if you haven't checked out our Patreon page, I'd like you to do so because we are going to start putting some content over there that is only for our Patreon subscribers. You can get content for as little as donating $1 a month, and it could just be a one-time donation. We have other freebies over there that you can get depending upon how much you would like to donate. And again, it could be a one-time donation, or you can continue to keep your subscription on a monthly basis at that donation level. But I just put my MBT immersive experience, which was a four-day intensive meditation training in Tennessee with physicist Tom Campbell. I was listening to binaural beats, going to altered states of consciousness, having out-of-body experiences and life-changing experiences that I was able to bring back for myself, for my clients, for my friends. That was just out of this world. So if you would like to listen to that, I'd like you to head on over to path11podcast.com. You're going to see an orange button that says Patreon. Become a Patreon today, and you can have access to that podcast. And I would like to remind you to head on over to path11productions.com and check out the membership that we have for the Afterlife Awareness Conference. We have over 25 hours of footage with amazing speakers like William Buhlman, Thomas John, Terry Daniel, Suzanne Geisman, Suzanne Northrop, Linda Fitch, Austin Wells, just a few people to name off that were amazing. These workshops are just so valuable. So I think that you would really enjoy it. It's also a great thing to think about to maybe give the gift to somebody who is struggling with grief. If you are looking for resources, this is a great conference to send people to check out. And thanks again for listening today.